June 12, 1944. The dawn broke over northern France with silver haze, the fields glistening with dew. Somewhere above the Ardennes, the skies seemed to shiver. Out of nowhere came a streak, a bullet of steel and fire. Pilots would later swear they saw it leave behind a strange, shimmering blue trail, almost as if it carried a fragment of the sky itself. They began calling it something whispered between comrades, the blue flame. To the Luftwaffe, it became a nightmare. To the Allies, a miracle. To the world, it remained a mystery. By mid-1944, the air war over Europe had reached a decisive moment. The Luftwaffe, once feared and respected, was stretched to its breaking point. Their pilots, some of the finest in history, were being ground down by losses. Their fuel reserves were dwindling. Allied bombers roamed the skies with growing confidence. Escort fighters prowled deep into enemy territory. Germany expected that the war in the air would be fought on predictable terms. Dogfights decided by skill and numbers. But reality was about to deliver a shock. At the center of this shift was a North American P-51 Mustang. Sleek, graceful, and lethal, the Mustang was already a wonder of engineering. Designed originally to serve as a long-range escort fighter, it had proven itself in the skies over Europe. But something was changing. Pilots began reporting that the Mustang, with its Merlin engine, was climbing faster, diving harder, and running straighter into danger than anything they had ever flown before. The Germans dismissed these reports at first. Perhaps it was pilot bravado, perhaps propaganda, until the evidence became undeniable. The secret was not a new airframe or a revolutionary engine. It was fuel, not just any fuel, something that American engineers quietly dubbed Blue Flame. It was a high-octane blend, a chemical marvel born from a work of scientists hidden away in the laboratories of Wright Field and refineries across the Midwest. They experimented with additives, testing mixtures far beyond standard specifications, pushing fuel beyond the known limits of the day. The result was a substance that, when fed into the Mustang's Merlin engine, increased horsepower dramatically. The result was speed that could outmatch anything Germany could field. Technical records from U.S. Army Air Forces show astonishing results. At operational altitudes, Mustangs running Blue Flame, fuel gained nearly 40 miles per hour over their normal top speed. Their climb rates improved by over 15%. They could chase enemy aircraft to heights previously impossible and linger in combat zones longer. It was not simply an improvement. It was a transformation. German intelligence initially dismissed the reports. They labeled them Allied propaganda, designed to intimidate. They are telling stories of winged demons. Luftwaffe reports claimed dismissively in June 1944. This is fantasy. But by July, encounters over Aachen and Cologne told a different story. Luftwaffe pilots began to speak of Mustangs that seemed to appear from nowhere, tearing past with unnatural speed and disappearing before the tracer fire could even find them. It was as if the devil himself was riding those planes, wrote one German ace in a diary later recovered by Allied forces. For the Mustang pilots themselves, the effect of Blue Flame was almost euphoric. Lieutenant James Jim Harrow, flying from RAF bases in England, would later recall in his memoirs, "Climbing out of haze at dawn, I swear the engine roared with the sound of thunder. It was faster, sharper, alive. You felt invincible, but you knew the war had only begun." Behind every pilot's exhilaration was the work of countless men and women who rarely left the pages of technical reports. At Wright Field in Ohio, engineers worked in secrecy, testing fuel blends in sealed chambers while technicians recorded each alteration. These men understood the stakes. "We knew it wasn't just about speed," one chemist later admitted. "It was survival for our pilots, for the mission, for the war." The chemical cocktail was dangerous, a mix that could overheat engines, shorten their lifespan, and demand precise handling. But in combat, those risks were worth the reward. The effect of the Blue Flame was immediate in the air war. Escort missions became more daring. Mustang squadrons could accompany bombers deeper into German territory, engaging Luftwaffe fighters far from Allied bases. Over the skies of the Reich, the Germans began to notice a disturbing pattern. Encounters with the new Mustangs ended with them unable to close in, their own fighters left gasping behind. Reports from German ground crews described puzzling wreckage, aircraft brought down by opponents they could never touch. The statistics were stark. In missions flown with the Blue Flame blend, Mustang kill ratios jumped dramatically. Escort losses dropped by nearly 40%. Bomber survival rates soared. To the Allied command, this fuel became not just a technical marvel, but a strategic weapon. Speed is victory, General Henry Hap Arnold would later remark. And now we have the speed. But these numbers alone did not capture what pilots felt in the cockpit. Flight logs from the period described something more, a transformation in the very soul of the Mustang. Pilots spoke of the climb, of the engine's roar like a beast freed, of the exhilaration of a plane that could turn the tide of battle. It was not just flying, one wrote. It was poetry in motion, with fire in its veins. German pilots began to adapt their strategies. They called these Mustangs Blaue Flamme, the Blue Flame, in hushed tones over their radios. Some sought to understand the fuel, attempting to reverse engineer it. Others accepted it as an inevitable reality of the war. We had underestimated them, admitted one Luftwaffe commander in a post-war memoir. They had found a way to turn chemistry into warcraft. In the Allied mess halls, the story of Blue Flame took on its own life. Mechanics joked about their pilots running on lightning and coffee. Pilots laughed, though they knew the stakes were grim. For them, the fuel was a promise of survival, of victory. But it was also a reminder that war was won as much in laboratories and refineries as in the air. There was an irony in it. The war was being decided by something so ordinary, so overlooked. Fuel, the liquid that powered their planes, became the secret weapon. Not a new cannon, not a bigger bomb, not a breakthrough in stealth, but a refined chemical mixture born of patient experiment and relentless secrecy. As the war moved into its final phase, the Blue Flame became legend. It was whispered in mess halls, discussed in briefings, and feared in German intelligence reports. Yet the truth remained buried in technical files and classified orders. To most of the world, it was just another footnote in history. But for those who lived it, the pilots who roared into battle, the engineers who labored in hidden labs, the commanders who dared to dream of air superiority, it was something far more. It was a turning point. By June 1944, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the skies over Europe had already been transformed. Somewhere high above, a Mustang surged through dawnlight, the roar of its engine like a hymn to innovation. The strange shimmer trailing behind it was no illusion. It was the mark of the Blue Flame. It was the sound of a war changing course. And somewhere below, in command posts and workshops, German officers were beginning to wonder what had happened to the air they once owned. But what came next shocked them even more. July 15, 1944. Over Aachen, the morning air was heavy with smoke and tension. Clouds hung low, thick as wool, but somewhere above them streaked something extraordinary. A formation of P-51 Mustangs, glinting steel under the sun, appeared like wraiths out of another world. Behind them trailed the strange shimmer that Luftwaffe pilots would soon fear most, the Blue Flame. For German air commanders, by this point, the term had become more than rumor. It was a specter haunting their war diaries and mission reports. They had fought with courage and skill, but now they faced something they could not explain. Their machines were tested to the limit, but the Mustangs with their secret fuel were something else entirely. Reports filtered down from fighter squadrons. Mustangs that climbed like meteors, that seemed to appear behind their own aircraft without warning. Encounters that ended in bewilderment, with German pilots losing entire formations to what they described as machines that outran death itself. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was already in crisis. Attrition had hollowed out experienced squadrons. Fuel shortages choked operations, and the Allies' growing air superiority threatened to strip Germany of the very skies it relied upon. In this climate, the appearance of the Blue Flame Mustangs was catastrophic. Their presence shifted not only tactical advantage, but morale. In the months before, German pilots had learned to respect the Mustang, but the fuel blend changed everything. It gave them a capability they had not anticipated. sustained speed at high altitudes, endurance to follow the enemy deep into hostile territory, and the ability to climb out of danger before the enemy could react. Luftwaffe tacticians scrambled for solutions, but each came too late. For every new tactic, the Mustangs had another advantage. Some German reports described a new breed of fighter, a legend that spread among airmen like a ghost story. The phrase Blaue Flamme became a whispered code, the sign of an enemy who had turned chemistry into a weapon. One Luftwaffe pilot wrote in his log, "They come at you like lightning and disappear before you know they were there. It is as if the air itself has betrayed us." For Allied commanders, this was confirmation that their gamble had worked. The experiments with fuel had not only borne fruit, they had created a strategic advantage that shifted the balance of air war in Europe. Escort missions that had once been perilous became more secure. Bomber losses fell sharply. Allied air superiority was no longer an aspiration. It was reality. Statistics from July to September 1944 speak clearly. Mustang squadrons flying with a Blue Flame blend reported a kill-to-loss ratio nearly twice as high as previous months. Bomber escort losses dropped from over 15% to less than 7%. The Luftwaffe could no longer count on disrupting Allied bombing raids with the efficiency they once had. For the first time, the Allies had the power to dictate when and where the air battle would be fought. But these numbers only tell part of the story. For those in the cockpit, the impact was personal. Lieutenant Harrow, writing in his logbook from missions over the Rhineland, recalled, "When you open the throttle, it's as though the plane comes alive. You're not just flying. You are part of something greater. You know the fuel is pushing you beyond the ordinary, and you trust it with your life." Not all pilots trusted it without question. The Blue Flame was a volatile mixture. Mechanics warned of overheating, of engines that could seize under strain. Fuel shortages meant that Blue Flame could not be used on every mission. It was reserved for decisive encounters. But when it was used, it became an equalizer. In the skies, it became a symbol of Allied ingenuity, of the unseen weapons that decide wars. For German engineers, discovering the secret of the Blue Flame became an obsession. Reports from secret divisions indicate experiments in higher-octane blends, in synthetic fuels, in desperate measures to counter the Mustang's advantage. Yet none proved effective before the Allies had pushed deep into the Reich. There was an irony here. Germany, masters of chemical innovation in the early years of the war, found itself chasing a fuel formula invented under secrecy thousands of miles away. Pilots from both sides knew this was more than an engineering victory. It was a war of adaptation. Luftwaffe ace Major Kurt Schmidt later admitted in memoirs, "We thought the fight was in the sky. We learned too late that the real battle was in the lab, in the refinery, in the mind of those who dared to change the rules." The effect of the Blue Flame extended beyond the battlefield. For Allied pilots, it became part of their identity. Mess hall banner carried its name. Squadron patches began to feature Blue Flames in stylized designs. Mechanics who worked on the fuel mixture were quietly celebrated. To them, it was a small victory in a war that demanded great sacrifices. For the Germans, it became a symbol of frustration and loss. Commanders feared it more than numbers. It represented an innovation they could not match in time. Pilots joked bitterly that the Allies had somehow stolen the power of the gods. Intelligence reports from Luftwaffe HQ included phrases like unknown fuel technology and chemical superiority, underlining the psychological impact. The war in the air had changed. By late 1944, Mustang pilots were no longer merely escorting bombers. They were hunting with a speed and precision that altered the strategic map. Entire Luftwaffe sorties were aborted in anticipation of Mustang interception. Allied bombers flew deeper into Germany with fewer losses, striking at the heart of war production. The Blue Flame was no longer just fuel. It was a weapon of war in its own right. There was, of course, a human cost. Pilots flying on Blue Flame knew they were riding a dangerous advantage. The fuel placed enormous strain on engines. A failure at altitude could mean certain death. But the men who flew Mustangs accepted it. For them, speed was survival. In letters home, Pilots wrote of engines that seemed to sing with power and of the strange exhilaration of flying faster than fear itself. In Germany, the effect was equally profound. Luftwaffe morale faltered as fuel shortages worsened and the Mustang threat grew. Experienced pilots were lost. New recruits were trained faster, but without the same skill. The war in the air was being decided in hours rather than days, and each loss brought the right closer to collapse. The Blue Flame's legacy did not end with victory. After the war, fuel research entered a new era, driven by what had been learned in those desperate months. The Mustang, already a legend, carried with it the story of an innovation that had changed the course of the air war. Military historians still debate how decisive the Blue Flame truly was, but among those who lived through it, there is no doubt. It was a turning point. For the Allied air forces, it was proof that war was won not only by courage but by invention. Somewhere in a quiet laboratory, long after the last Mustang had flown, the men who mixed those experimental fuels knew they had achieved something extraordinary. They had turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. They had given the pilots a gift: speed, endurance, survival. They had given them the Blue Flame. By the end of 1944, the skies over Europe belonged to the Allies. Mustang squadrons patrolled from the North Sea to the Alps. The roar of their engines was a warning, and for many German pilots, a sign that the war was lost. Yet for all its technical brilliance, the Blue Flame's greatest legacy was not in numbers or tactics. It was in the way it transformed the human experience of war. It made pilots faster, braver, sharper. It made them believe they could change the course of history. The war ended in May 1945, but the story of the Blue Flame lived on. In pilot memoirs, in engineering reports, in whispered conversations, in airfields long since abandoned. To this day, it remains a testament to the hidden battles fought away from the front lines, in laboratories, in refineries, in the minds of those who dared to innovate. And somewhere in the stillness of summer dawn, if you listen closely to the wind, you can almost hear it, the distant roar of a Mustang climbing into the light, trailing behind it that strange, shimmering blue flame. Because in the end, the war in the air was not decided by steel alone. It was decided by fuel. And fuel, in this case, was blue.